Some of you have said to me over the month of August, as we've been listening to the feisty teachings of Jesus, that you're really curious about how I'm going to unpack these parables and stories. And I hope you're just as curious this morning, and that I do the Scripture as much honor as it deserves. I have a little book on my shelf that I kidnapped from my husband's library. Every now and then I'll hear him say, "Where is Paul Welter's book, Learning from Children?" And I'll go, "I don't know." But I took it and I put it in my library because I save it every time I have to talk about humility. Because he tells a wonderful little story. Now, Dr. Paul Welter was a professor on staff at what used to be called Kearney State College, and eventually became Kearney University of Nebraska. All the university systems in Nebraska were consolidated, you know. Well, he taught a lot about psychology and counseling, and he was also a Christian man, and so his thoughts and his learnings through knowledge and also through his walk with the Spirit come together in a little book called Learning from Children. And he has a chapter in there about measuring up. And the chapter is actually called Becoming Humble, the belief that you are incomparable. Only he's not referring to his rank in society. He's talking at the beginning of his little chapter simply about his height and how his father would occasionally back him up, you know, to the kitchen cupboard and have him stand straight and then pull out a yardstick and place it, you know, on the top of his head and make a mark so that they could see how he was progressing in height. Only the challenge was Paul Welter was the youngest, and he had an older brother who he always wanted to best. What is it about two children and one always wanting, you know, to topple the other? I don't know. So he would try to stand really stiff and really tall and pull that spine up, hoping to catch his older brother, but it didn't happen. But he goes on to talk about in this chapter about measuring up on a spiritual level. And how when he was hearing the gospel and sitting in church all of his early formation years, that he had this feeling all the time that he wasn't good enough, and that he was constantly having to measure up, you know, to the 10 Commandments in particular. Well, he was eventually invited to a Faith at Works conference, where the lecturer was making the point that God's kingdom wasn't something we had to keep measuring ourselves against all the time so that we were always feeling small and bad. It is instead a place of grace. And by grace, the lecturer meant that God simply loves us no matter what. We can't earn or perform our way into God's love. God's love simply is. You know, Paul Welter writes, when I heard that truth again that day, maybe because I was more mature, it sunk down deep into my bones. And for the first time in a long time, he said, I experienced a spiritual renewal, a sense of freedom. I realized I had been standing stiff, way too stiff, like I had my back against that cupboard for 54 years, trying to measure up, comparing and competing with others, you know. Competing being the struggle for social power and individual significance. So he heard at this conference the invitation to let it go, just to let it go. And that's what he says. You know, I discovered a truth I had long forgotten, that I am loved and I am incomparable, that I've been made by God with great love and I'm unique, and that mold has been thrown away. And as he began to really sit with this truth he had forgotten, his value in God's heart, all the other pressures to perform just melted away. You know, the social pressures. He chose that day to not participate in that race anymore for worldly power and for human significance as seen through the eyes of the world. Well, many a mystic would teach us this morning that social power and individual significance are simply illusions. The world has created that race, not God, and we truly can choose whether we want to indulge in it or step back from it and just be loved. Just be. Well, Wilter concludes his chapter on humility by repeating a story that had been told to him by a college student as she observed the vulnerability, the openness, the acceptance of her little sister who was a Girl Scout. And the college student relates this story. My sister is 7 years old. Recently, she asked me to walk around the block with her to sell Girl Scout cookies to the neighbors. It amazed me that she knew every family on the block, and I didn't even know our next-door neighbors. It occurred to this college student that children have no inhibitions about walking up and talking to people. Scares their parents sometimes, doesn't it? But they don't. Whereas adults are always afraid of what people will think, and so they go through life never knowing the people on the block. If they do, it's often because their kids play together. If only adults could be as open and friendly as children. What Wilter is describing is humility, the ability to be free of comparison, to refrain from distinguishing. To take it one step further, humility is the ability to be open and friendly, like Girl Scouts selling cookies, right? Without seeing anything, and this is what's interesting, without seeing anything, be it people or events, as a commentary on your value or significance. And I want you to hear this today. It's not just about people, but it's also about the events in your life, being able to see them as just is, not as a commentary on your value or significance. How do we know we're standing in that other place that Jesus is asking us not to stand today? When we judge events as maybe destroying something or giving value to us, right? Or when we find maybe in our prayer life, we find ourselves saying to God, I don't deserve that. See, that's when we're standing in that judgment space, and we're not standing in that free space that Jesus so often stood in, and I'll get to that in a moment. So what we're beginning to understand is that we have been born into God's family, and we all are invited to sit and feast at the banquet table. Who knows what God is going to serve today? It could be soup, it could be rice, it could be steak, it could be your family, it could be a stranger, it could be the President of the United States, it could be a homeless woman. It could be success today, or it could be challenge, even failure. It could be gain, right? It could be loss. Am I beginning to sound a little bit like the book of Ecclesiastes? A time to be born, a time to die, a time to laugh, a time to cry. We don't know what the feast of God is going to serve us today. The invitation is to receive the feast the same way it is served to us, with grace, with love, and acceptance, right? Well, in his book, The Song of the Bird, Jesuit priest and author and conference speaker Anthony DeMello tells this little story. And it's called Very Well, Very Well. And it goes like this. A village girl became an unwed mother, and after several beatings, revealed who the father of the child was, the Zen master living on the outskirts of the village. Well, the villagers trooped into the Zen master's house, rudely disturbed his meditation, denounced him as a hypocrite, and told him to keep the baby. And all the Zen master said was, Very well. Very well. He picked the baby up, and he made arrangements with a local woman to look after the baby at his expense. Well, his name, of course, the Zen master's name, was ruined, and all of his disciples abandoned him. When this had gone on for a year, the girl could bear it no longer and confessed that she had lied. The father was truly the boy next door. The villagers bowed profoundly to the Zen master to beg his pardon and ask him to take the baby back. All the master said as he handed back the child to the family was, "Very well, very well." De Mello concludes, the awakened man. The events didn't change. His perception of the events changed. Now, judgment, the opposite of humility, means to distinguish or to compare. It's to be closed spiritually, to be hostile. Both people and events are a commentary on your significance and a threat to your status, both of which we need to feel in control of. So in our lesson today, I want you to think about this. Jesus is attending a Sabbath meal, it says, with one of the top leaders of the Pharisees, a person perceived to be honorable and just. And yet in another story, Jesus is just as apt to be dining with Zacchaeus, the tax collector, or even a prostitute, two persons perceived as scoundrels in society. I want us to be aware of this morning how Jesus flowed between persons, between everyone, embracing everyone as equals, and inviting everyone to consider this about God and to consider that about God. He didn't rank people vertically. He welcomed them horizontally, just like God welcomed him. He wasn't bound by the social norms of his day that you are who you eat with. He was instead an instrument of God's grace. Everyone, as Paul Welter writes, was incomparable. Every event was incomparable as well. He attended weddings. He taught crowds. He ate in an upper room with his intimate disciple family and a few more persons in the entourage. We know there were more people in that upper room that day, right? He also ate with prostitutes, and he talked to Zacchaeus up a tree. He stood in a garden and prayed. He stood in a court and got whipped. And he also was the victim of crucifixion. Now, who knew what any of these events meant, really? Right? Except God? Were they good? Were they bad? Another one of my favorite authors, Eugene May, he talks about how when he was diagnosed with cancer, he thought that was a bad thing, but it turned out to be a good thing because all of a sudden people who never had time for him had time for him. Have you ever noticed in your life sometimes when you see something coming, through the door, you think, oh, this is going to be the worst thing ever? And it turns out not to be the worst thing ever. In fact, it might have some good things attached to it. And the same is also true that how you think maybe when you get something, you're thinking in your mind, oh, this is really great. And it turns out not to be so great after all. See, here's the question, the mystery. Who knows really what is the significance of an event but God? And who knows what the significance of a person is, right? But God. Everything and everyone to be received with grace, never asking, as my mother always did, what will the neighbors think? What a horrible way to live. I hated it growing up. We don't ask, how am I being perceived by those who possess worldly power? Much of who I hope might come my way, right? What will come my way? However, as Jesus observed the religious community, which Luke reminds us was also observing him, he discovered that judgment was practiced with regularity, and it grieved him. This was God in the community, perceived as God in the community, and judgment was practiced with regularity. You know, Jesus struggled to bring the faith community along with him to the banquet where God was the chef and their dining companions, friends on the journey. That's all we all are to each other. We're all just friends on the journey. And oh, how the faith community resisted him. You know, in the verse preceding our lesson today, Jesus offers a lament over Jerusalem, sighing, "Oh, how I've longed to gather you together like children, you know, like a hen gathers her brood, but you refuse me. You refuse and you turn away." As Jesus says to the religious community in Luke chapter 13, verses 6 through 7, "You're supposed to be an apple tree, and I'm looking for your apples. I'm looking for your fruit." What's some of the fruit that Jesus is looking for? Well, we've heard a lot of different things this month. Prayer, right? Patience, a passion for prayer and social justice and compassion. Today, the fruit that Jesus is looking for is humility, the ability to be open and friendly to God and neighbor. And Jesus wants us to understand that in order for us, God's church, to be a big deal in God's kingdom, our ego, and churches have egos, must grow smaller so God's way can grow taller. Instead of sitting ourselves at the head table, Jesus says, we should be amazed that by the grace of God, we're in the same room. You ever thought about that when you pray in particular? Or when we're together in this room and we will sing that song, "Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place"? Isn't it amazing that we're in the same room? Especially since we know so little. Of course, we first have to come to that awareness, right? That we know so little and God knows so much. Jesus also wants us to understand that when we include the most vulnerable members of society in our religious community, that we experience God's blessing, and we will be amazed and delighted, although we have no idea what it's going to be. Only Jesus says it this way to his audience. The host, meaning God, knows our proper place in the kingdom of God, and that we might be surprised to learn that we are not the guest of honor, and that the host, meaning the church, might discover unimaginable blessings at the hand of God, were we to offer our most intimate of activities, the fellowship dinners and the communion table, to those whom the world has labeled as unimprovable, undeserving, and unlovable. You hear that? Humility in the church is a strange virtue. We can't write down on a piece of paper that we want to be humble today. As soon as we pursue it, we've lost it. It is gift. And it's come about through all of those activities of the human condition, you might say, that we often find scary and appalling, and in a competitive country, undesirable, right, and unproductive. What does Jesus teach us about humility? We grow taller by growing smaller. We become first when we become last. We become the in crowd when we eat with those who've been labeled outsiders, the out crowd. We become strong when we become vulnerable. We become rich when we become poor. We become wise when we can say with all honesty, we don't know. Think about that little parable from Anthony DeMello now. Remember, what did the Zen master say? Very well, very well. Our goal is to earn certification in very well. Very well. I don't know. I don't know.